His Excellency Mr. Arjun Singh, President of the City Parliament, Mr. Karl-Heinz Bipan, Professor Bipan Chandra, Professor Rothermund, leaders of the city of Frankfurt, ladies and gentlemen. Let me express my gratitude for the words expressed today by you, sir, the President of the Parliament, and the very thoughtful overview of Gandhiji's life given by Mr. Shri Arjun Singh. I'm going to discuss Gandhi's journey in life through his voyages on the seas and oceans of this world. We can approach his life in many different ways. I'm going to discuss some of his voyages. I'm going to do this for the first time in my life. If you find it interesting, you will be lucky enough to be the first audience to hear this approach. If, as is more likely, it falls flat, you will be the unfortunate guinea pigs of a poor experiment. We've seen the marching Gandhi, the walking Gandhi, but there is also the sailing Gandhi. He was born in the city of Porbandar on the west coast of India, a town almost completely encircled by the sea, the Arabian Sea. You know that he led the salt march to the sea. In his famous manifesto, Hind Swaraj, he attacks motor cars, he attacks airplanes, he attacks railway trains. He does not attack ships. I will start with his 1888 voyage from Bombay to England on the steamship Clyde. He was not yet 19 years. He was going to England to study law. On this voyage on the Clyde, he struggled to speak in English. As he would say, I had to frame every sentence in my mind before I could bring it out. For the first time, he learned to eat, or tried to learn to eat, with knife and fork. His mother had extracted 3 promises from him as a condition for his going to England: that he would not eat meat, he would not drink wine, and he would not touch women. Not knowing what on the ship's menu was free of meat, and too shy to ask, he survived on some sweets and fruits he was carrying until his cabin mate, another Indian, coaxed some Indians on the crew to cook some dal for Mohandas. After he reached London, he wrote a diary about this journey of his, this voyage of his. He tried to play the piano on board the ship. He admired the efficiency with which life was organized on the ship. He marveled at the construction of the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal was built in the year in which Gandhi was born, so only 18 years previous to this. So Gandhi marveled at this Suez Canal that was constructed. He felt that the engineers of the canal had competed with nature. Now, these vows he had taken, the word of these vows spread quickly across the ship to the other passengers, and Indian and European passengers warned him that he was going to a climate where no one could live without meat and liquor, certainly not without meat. He would find this out, he was told, if not in the Red Sea, then in the Mediterranean, and without question of the Bay of Biscoe, and certainly on the English Channel. The different seas came and went, and Mohandas survived. Having worn a black suit while on board, He emerged on landing in London in white flannels and found that he was the only person wearing such clothes. He spent 3 years in England. In 1891, he returned to India. And this is what he wrote about London. Remember, this is the man who was going to fight the British Empire. He writes that on board the ship, this is what he writes. I could not make myself believe that I was going to India until I stepped into the steamship Oceana of the P&O Company. So much attached was I to London and its environments, for who would not be? London with its teaching institutions, public galleries, vegetarian restaurants, is a fit place for a student and a traveller, a trader and a fanist, as a vegetarian would be called by his opponents. Thus it was not without regret that I left dear London. Now on this ship, and this is the Oceana, then changed into a ship called the Astana, Gandhi was anxious. He didn't quite know what life would be like back home in India, whether he would succeed as a lawyer. And by this time, he had worked on a fallback option, a second string to his bow. He was going to try and also be a writer. If he didn't succeed in law, maybe he would succeed as a writer. And he wrote 2 articles while on board this ship. These are the only 2 articles I think that he has ever written in his whole life, which are, no, not the only articles he wrote in his whole life. He wrote thousands of articles. The only 2 articles where he writes, above all, you might say merely to please the reader, because he's practicing his skill in a possible profession for him. And he writes in a suave tone, a mocking tone. He writes in an understating, a very British way. For instance, and also in a snobbish way. He refers to, quote unquote, a crowd of dirty-looking beggars that he meets in Malta. He writes of, quote, rogues and rascals he meets in Port Said. And he talks of waiters who, quote, murder the Queen's English. And listen to this, and are, quote, the reverse of clean, unquote. He describes the meals in a day of an average passenger. The pre-breakfast tea and biscuits, a huge breakfast, he details its elements, an easily digestible lunch, it's called dinner, with, quote, plenty of mutton and vegetables, rice and curry, pastry and whatnot, fruit and nuts, followed by, quote, a refreshing cup of tea and biscuits at 4 p.m., a high tea at 6:30 p.m., bread and butter, jam or marmalade, or both, salad, chops, tea, coffee, etc. Thereafter, since the sea air was so very salubrious, the passengers could not retire to bed before taking a very few, only 8 or 10 or 15 at the most, biscuits, a little cheese, and some wine or beer. Some very nice ladies and gentlemen traveled in the first saloon, but it would not do to have all play and no quarrel, so some of the passengers thought fit to get drunk almost every evening. Beg your pardon, Mr. Editor, they got drunk almost every evening, but this particular evening they got both drunk and disorderly. He also wrote, and you can see how he observed his fellow passengers. By the way, this is another of his trait that very few people have noticed, his very sharp sense of what people around him looked like, what they were thinking, what they were doing. What a human cargo was on the Oceana and the Assam, the 2 ships. Some were going to make fortunes in Australia. Some, having finished their studies in England, were going to India to earn a decent living. Some were called away by a sense of duty. Some were going to meet their husbands in Australia or India. And some were adventurers who, being disappointed at home, were going to pursue their adventures God knows where. So he makes a good study of the other passengers on board. The sea was rough as the Assam approached Bombay. Almost every passenger was sick. I alone was in perfect form. He, throughout his life, was a very good sailor. He never was seasick. Staying on deck to see the stormy surge and enjoying the splash of the waves. But there was an inner storm matching the outer storm. There was indeed something he faced on landing, which occurred in pelting rain. His older brother met him off the boat and revealed that his mother, Putli Bai, had died while he was in England. She had died aged around 41, shortly after she heard that her son had passed the bar finals, but the family did not want to give Mohandas the news while he was in a foreign land. Most of my cherished hopes were shattered. My grief was even greater than over my father's death. The father had died before he went to England. But I did not give myself to any wild expression of grief. I could even check the tears and took to life just as though nothing had happened. So, voyage number 3. This is now 2 years after he returns to India. He takes the ship to South Africa. This time he's full of zest. He wants to find out what this new country is going to be like. He's only not yet 23. But he is conscious that he's on the threshold of something very important, very great. He is conscious also that he's likely to meet racial arrogance in South Africa. Told that all space in the first class had been booked for the Governor-General of Mozambique and his party, Gandhi had coolly gone up to the chief officer of this ship, the Safari, and asked to be squeezed in somehow. After being surveyed from top to toe, he was given a spare berth in the chief officer's cabin, not normally offered to passengers. The ship's captain also befriended Gandhi and played chess with him. At Zanzibar, where passengers bound for South Africa waited 8 or 10 days before they shifted to the Admiral, which was of the German East Africa line, Gandhi obtained some glimpses of life in Africa. He saw that Africa's trees were gigantic, the fruits were gigantic, and he had some time to think about South Africa. So when he arrived on 23rd May in Port Durban in South Africa, he was wearing a frock coat, striped trousers, but a black turban, a watch and a chain. He was a modernized yet Indian barrister. As he would later recall, I was well dressed according to my lights and landed in Durban with a due sense of my importance. He was met on the ship by Abdullah Sheth, the Muslim businessman from his city of Porbandar who had invited Gandhi for some legal work in South Africa. Glancing around him with very sharp eyes, Gandhi noticed that the whites who were approaching the Admiral to welcome passengers were scornful towards the Indians. Many of them greeted Abdullah Sheth, whom they knew, in a snobbish manner, Gandhi noticed. He also noticed that he himself was looked at, stared at with curiosity. Okay, voyage number 4. After 2 or 3 years in South Africa, he goes back to India to fetch his wife and children. He realizes that he has a job to do. He has a purpose. He has to fight for the rights of the Indians of South Africa. So this time, this is the journey from Bombay again to South Africa. And this time he is with his wife and with his two sons and some other relatives. He was planning to stay on in India for a while, but a cable came that South Africa needed him, so he goes on this ship. Kastur, or Kasturba, as she was called, his wife, and the boys were excited at the prospect of a voyage, but it was Gandhi who decided every detail for it, including their shoes, stockings, clothes, the food they should eat, and their manners. His family had to approximate to, quote, the European standard without copying it. Gandhi decided that Kastur's sari and the boy's coat and trousers would be worn in the style of the most westernized Indians of the time, the Parsis, and that the family should wear stockings and shoes and eat with knives and forks. Recalling in his autobiography these aspects of the journey to Durban, quote, "My first voyage with my wife and children," as he calls it, Gandhi is quite amused but also somewhat contrite, somewhat guilty. He smiles at the hybrid identity he had prescribed for his family, and he regrets the force of authority that lay behind his prescriptions. But in 1896, when the voyage actually took place, the autobiography was written many years later, when the voyage took place, he was not amused or contrite, and he thought that a practically unlettered wife required teaching from her husband. But on this voyage, something else happened. 4 days before they reached the coast of Natal, a great violent storm hit the boats. Though the captain of the Courland said that a well-built ship could stand almost any weather, the passengers became inconsolable. The ship rocked and rolled, and every minute were heard sounds and crashes which foreboded breaches and leaks. In different languages, everyone prayed, including the captain, to the one and only God. By the way, this experience, Gandhi is now, 26 or 27 years old. There is this storm, and there are Hindus and Muslims and Parsis and Christians, and the captain, also Christian. Everybody praying in their different languages for some relief, for mercy, to be saved from the storm. His will be done was the only cry on every lip. This experience was the foundation of the multi-faith prayers for which Gandhi became known later. By this time, Gandhi, who has found a purpose, he is actually in charge. He is calm. He is the leader. He assists the captain. He persuades everybody at the ship to remain calm. But by this time, the whites in Durban are agitated, and they want to prevent this ship from landing. And they are accusing that Gandhi is bringing an army of Indians to invade Natal on these ships. And so there is quite a demonstration planned against him. Since this is something that happened on land, I mustn't dwell too much on it, but I must mention that while he walked from the ship to his home, he was very roughly beaten up, nearly thrashed to death. He somehow survived. Years later, he would say that God has always come to my rescue. My courage was put to a severe test on 13th January 1897, when I went ashore and faced the howling crowd determined on lynching me. I was surrounded by thousands, but my courage did not fail me. I really cannot say how the courage came to me, but it did. God is great. Gandhi always felt that he was a fearful man. He didn't know how the courage came to him. But at the time, another white man, a man called Lawton, a lawyer, said, intimidation is out of the question for Gandhi, because if Gandhi knew that the town hall was going to be thrown at him, I believe from what I saw that he would not quail. He thought he was fearful, and he was surprised that he was courageous. But this man who was walking with him thought that Gandhi was courageous, that even if the town hall was thrown at him, he would not be afraid. Okay. Now, visit number 5, voyage number 5, that I'm going to mention. There were other voyages. This is in 1909, and he's sailing from England back to India. 1909. He goes to England on behalf of the Indians of South Africa for the rights of the Indians of South Africa. But what happens when he arrives in England? He finds that an Indian group, radical young Indians, have killed a white man called Wiley, who was a senior officer in the British government. This man was invited to a tea party by Indian students. As he came to the tea party, one young man shot him. There was an Indian doctor also present who tried to interpose himself between the man who shot the bullet and this Englishman, he also was killed. Wiley was killed. Dr. Kawasji Lal Kaka was killed. And the Indians there were very excited about this. The Indian students felt it was a fantastic thing that this officer has been killed successfully. And Gandhi was profoundly concerned. Profoundly concerned. And he felt that if this method of assassination, terrorism, violence was going to be accepted by the young Indians and by the people of India, then British rule would be extended for a much longer time. Because Gandhi's assessment was violence was something that the British knew how to handle. Non-violence was something they could not handle. While he was in England in 1909 negotiating with British leaders, and the negotiations failed, but Gandhi got this inspiration that the non-violent strategy was the right strategy, one. Non-violent strategy was the right strategy, and that non-violence could be linked to India, and violence could be linked to England. Western society is violent. Indian society is non-violent. And Gandhi realized he has found a fantastic formula. That he would teach non-violent strategy to India as the only strategy that would work in India. And this way he would not only defeat the British in the long run, he would also defeat the violent revolutionaries. Just as a scientist, when he discovers a medical or scientific secret, is excited, and he writes his paper in an excited way, Gandhi wrote his strategic document Hind Swaraj on the ship from England to South Africa. He wrote this document Hind Swaraj, and the Gandhi who writes this is a thrilled author of a new strategic discovery. He wrote this on the strong stamped stationery of the Kildonan Castle, that's the name of the ship. 20 chapters, very little in the 30,000 word manuscript was ever scratched out or written over. When the right hand needed rest, Gandhi wrote with his left hand. This was a habit he then continued for the rest of his life. The swift and irresistible flow of the text onto the ship's notepaper and the confidence its words exhale suggests a sense in the author of a thrilling and promising discovery. He wrote to his friend Hermann Kallenbach. Now, Hermann Kallenbach was a German architect of a Jewish background who became one of Gandhi's close friends in Johannesburg. He wrote to Hermann Kallenbach that I have produced an original work. He's so excited. And in the foreword he writes, I have written because I could not restrain myself. The argument of Hind Swaraj is like this. Hind Swaraj means Indian independence. At one level, Swaraj or self-rule means an individual's rule over himself or herself. At the political level, it means home rule or self-government. But if independence is to satisfy, self-government must be grounded on the control that leaders and citizens exercise over themselves. Also, Hindus, Muslims, and everybody else in India belong to the composite Indian nation, which is perfectly entitled to self-government. Rejecting Western modern civilization and its inseparable component, brute force, Indians must embrace the simple life, Swadeshi, that which is made within India, and Satyagraha, non-violent resistance. Only non-violence suits the genius of India. Violence is futile, Western, and destructive of India's future. In Hind Swaraj, which he writes on this ship, Kildonan Castle, in 1909, Gandhi gives India a modern concept of dharma or religion. He knows religion is a strong force in India, clarifying that by dharma he means that religion which underlies all religions, He separates religion from its divisive role, that is, in setting Hindus and Muslims against each other. He also takes religion out from its conventional Indian role, which is a role in rituals, a role for demonstrating social status. Instead, he employs dharma, which he equates with ethics for citizenship, liberty, and mutual assistance. Now I will move to another journey. This is in 1914-15. He has finished his work in South Africa. He returns to India via England. When he reaches London, he knows that World War I has broken out. Herman Kallenbach is with him. Kallenbach wants to go with him to India, but Kallenbach is a German, so the British will not allow him to go to India. So Gandhi and Kasturba go alone on the ship known as the Arabia from England to India after the World War has started. Now the Gandhi going to India from England in December 14, he's 45, but now he's like a general who is going to mobilize a whole country for his strategy. He has finished his South African work, he has developed his strategy and ideas, he is going to India, he wants to mobilize the whole country for his battle. He's not been to India for 12 years. His brothers are dead, his mother and father are dead. He's not going to his hometown Rajkot. He's going to make all of India his home. As I mentioned, this is the first visit he made where he and his wife were traveling absolutely alone. No children, no other companions. She had him to herself, and he was thinking about the strategy for the future. He also used the time to learn Bengali, which he wanted to learn because he wanted to reach all of India. Bengali was not his language, it was the language of the eastern part of India. He came from the western part of India. He's aware that he's on the eve of something very great. And this is what he writes in some of his letters from that ship. He writes to Kallenbach, because Kallenbach couldn't come, he's still in England, that on the ship he says to him, I have switched back somewhat to Mrs. Gandhi's disgust from European-style clothes to the dress of the indentured workers of South Africa's Indians. But he has also decided, he writes to somebody in India, that in India he would wear only our customary dress, the clothes of a Gujarati of their background. He was concerned about the clothes he should wear. This was part of his reflection on his strategy for India. He did not feel he could revert to the European clothes, he had given them up, or appear in Bombay in the dress of the indentured workers of South Africa. He was also praying for some wisdom or strength on what he should do. He writes to a colleague of his, Albert West, an Englishman who was in South Africa. I've been so often prevented from reaching India that it seems hardly real that I'm sitting in a ship bound for India. After having reached India, what shall I do with myself? He is concerned. However, lead kindly light amid the encircling gloom, lead thou me on. This is one of his favorite hymns. That thought is my solace. He also writes to Kallenbach, before retiring, I invariably read the Bhagavad Gita and the Ramayana and sing one hymn. So he is praying for all the strength he could get. So I find it interesting to imagine Gandhi on board the Arabia, she having him all to herself, he always a good sailor, finding pleasure in the voyage and singing each night a prayer song as the ship plows its way across the waters. Who greets him when the Arabia arrives in Bombay? Well, one of the men who greets him is Muhammad Ali Jinnah, his future foe and adversary, the future founder of Pakistan. He presides at the welcoming party for Gandhi in Bombay in 1915. Gandhi has decided that he is not going to just appeal to his Gujarati community, He's not going to head only to his place, Gujarat. He's going to make all of India his home and base, and he's going to cultivate allies all across India. He will start movements in different parts of India. So, off the ship and at the receptions that were given to Gandhi in Bombay, he wore the plain, if cumbersome, clothes of a middle-class conservative Hindu from Kathiawar. A long cloak, a shirt under the cloak, a dhoti down to his ankles, and a very heavy turban. The political and social leaders welcoming Gandhi turned out either in European dress or in very ornate Indian clothes. Gandhi's appearance was odd in comparison, and so was his use of Gujarati in responding to the speeches of welcome. Through his language and his dress, Gandhi was inviting a direct personal link with non-elite Indians. On their part, the embarrassed, shocked, or amused elite leaders thought that the strange man they were welcoming would soon disappear into the Indian wilderness, but he did not disappear. In fact, he did implement his strategy, and almost the whole of India did, in the years to follow, turn to him. So by the time, there are only 2 more voyages, I'm coming to the end. Voyage number 7 I'm going to speak about is when he goes in 1931 from India, this time as the voice of India, as India's voice to negotiate with the British leaders. He goes on the SS Rajputana. And this daughter of the English Admiral Madeline Slade, who had the Indian name Meera, who was one of Gandhi's co-workers, she was also traveling with him. She was one of the aides that he had. And she again said that yes, Gandhi was far and away the best sailor among the party. An impish young fellow passenger on the Rajputana buttonholed Gandhi one day and said, Mr. Gandhi, may I give you this journal we are preparing on the ship? It was called Scandal Times. So Gandhi took it, 4 or 5 sheets, and they were fastened together by a pin. Gandhi removed the pin, kept the pin, returned the papers, and said, thank you very much. When the ship passed through Egypt, Port Said and Suez, Egyptians, resentful of European hegemony, turned up at Suez and Port Said, but they were not allowed to meet the chief rebel and foe of the empire. The poet Ahmad Shawki had written a poem in Egypt. This is what he had said to fellow Egyptians. Stop to welcome him from close quarters, sitting in boats, also from a distance in whatever way possible. He is a guide and pathfinder like Confucius. He has inspired in Hindus and Muslims the spirit of mutual love, and with his spiritual powers brought the 2 swords in one sheath. He is a great powerhouse which generates the power to tame predators. This is the Egyptian message. This Gandhi who's going to pass through. Then, after his conference, which is again not a success, his negotiations, but there's a great success in his bonding with the British people. He goes to Lancashire and meets the people who have been rendered unemployed because of the Indian boycott of cloth. But these poor workers and their families, they welcome this man. They embrace him. He establishes a remarkable bond with the people of England, and he then takes the ship, the Pilsner, from Brindisi in Italy. On his return journey from England, he was in France, he was in Switzerland, he was in Italy. Unfortunately, he was not in Germany. As far as I know, he never traveled to Germany. But I think he must be glad that you are having this occasion here today. So he's on the Pilsner, and by this time the British mood has toughened, and they're going to be tough. He knows there's going to be a crackdown. And while he's on the ship, he hears that 2 of his closest, most wonderful associates and colleagues, Jawaharlal Nehru and Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan of the Northwest Frontier Province, have been arrested.
And his reaction, these are Christmas gifts from the Viceroy. And he's determined to fight, and he puts up a tremendous fight when he does return to India. That's all as far as the voyages is concerned, but one final comment. In 1946, February, a year and a half before India becomes independent, there is a naval mutiny. Naval mutiny. In this mutiny, several hundred very enthusiastic, very passionate young men who are ratings in the Indian Navy, they mutiny. They capture some ships. They capture an onshore facility for the Navy. No Indian officer joins this. By this time, the Royal Indian Navy has thousands of Indian officers also. They don't join the mutiny. But several hundred of the ratings create a mutiny. And they go to a very interesting woman called Aruna Asaf Ali, who's a great fighter for India's independence. And they think that she will support their mutiny. She doesn't really. She says this can't work. You go and talk things over with the British officers. Their objections are twofold. One, the food they get is terrible. And two, the British officers treat them with discrimination. So Aruna Asaf Ali does not encourage them. And then, however, there is a mutiny, there is a fight. The British are very ruthless in suppressing it. Gandhi is not sure that this is good strategy. He disapproves of it. Then the mutiny ends. But there are several deaths also. It's a tremendous event. Aruna Asaf Ali, although she did discourage them from continuing the mutiny, afterwards when there was a strike in support of the mutiny by the workers of Bombay City, and there was repression, Aruna Gandhi supported the fight and the strike. I want to read to you Gandhi's comments on the mutiny and on Aruna Asaf Ali's actions. While the mutiny was taking place, Gandhi issued a public statement disapproving of it and asking the mutineers to return. After it was over, Aruna Asaf Ali had criticized Gandhi's statement, and Gandhi now answers her. I do not read the 1942 events as does the brave lady. 42 saw a great movement in India, Quit India movement, where Aruna Asaf Ali played a tremendous part. Gandhi says it was good that the people rose spontaneously. It was bad that some or many resorted to violence. India has become a pattern for all exploited races of the earth because India's has been an open, unarmed effort which demands sacrifice from all without inflicting injury on the usurper. The millions of India would not have been awakened but for the open, unarmed struggle. Gandhi always felt that an armed struggle has to be secret, has to be conspiratorial. Everybody can't join. But a non-violent struggle, everybody can join. Women can join, old people can join, children can join. Millions joined in India. Aruna would, these are Aruna Asaf Ali's words, she would rather unite Hindus and Muslims at the barricade than on the constitutional front, unquote. Aruna Asaf Ali said, what's wrong? Hindus and Muslims will fight together at the barricade. We will find unity that way. Gandhi's answer, even in terms of violence, this is a misleading proposition. Fighters do not always live at the barricade. They are too wise to commit suicide. The barricade life has always to be followed by the constitutional life. That front is not taboo forever. It is a matter of great relief that the ratings have listened to Sardar Patel's advice to surrender. They have not surrendered their honor. So far as I can see, in resorting to mutiny, they were badly advised. If it was for grievance, fancied or real, they should have waited for the guidance and intervention of political leaders of their choice. If they mutinied for the freedom of India, they were doubly wrong. They could not do so without a call from a prepared revolutionary party. Aruna is entitled to say that the people are not interested in the ethics of violence or non-violence, but the people are very much interested in knowing the way which will bring freedom to the masses, violence or non-violence. Later, the young man who led the mutiny acknowledged that the mutiny was immature and a great futility. On his part, a Gandhi who disapproved of violence, and please note this, was nonetheless ready to examine violence from the standpoint of its effectiveness, to distinguish between thoughtless and thoughtful violence, between foolhardiness and a mutiny that answers a call from a revolutionary party. So Gandhi's nonviolence is a strategy that many fighters in the world today can yet learn from. Thank you very much.
Now, these vows he had taken, the word of these vows spread quickly across the ship to the other passengers, and Indian and European passengers warned him that he was going to a climate where no one could live without meat and liquor, certainly not without meat. He would find this out, he was told, if not in the Red Sea, then in the Mediterranean, and without question on the Bay of Biscoe, and certainly on the English Channel. The different seas came and went, and Mohandas survived. Having worn a black suit while on board, he emerged on landing in London in white flannels and found that he was the only person wearing such clothes. He spent 3 years in England. In 1891, he returned to India, and this is what he wrote about London. Remember, this is the man who was going to fight the British Empire. He writes that on board the ship, this is what he writes. I could not make myself believe that I was going to India until I stepped into the steamship Oceana of the P&O Company. So much attached was I to London and its environments, for who would not be? If, as is more likely, it falls flat, you will be the unfortunate guinea pigs of a poor experiment. We've seen the marching Gandhi, the walking Gandhi, but there is also the sailing Gandhi. He was born in the city of Porbandar on the west coast of India, a town almost completely encircled by the sea, the Arabian Sea. You know that he led the salt march to the sea. In his famous manifesto, Hind Swaraj, he attacks motor cars, he attacks airplanes, he attacks railway trains. He does not attack ships. I will start with his 1888 voyage from Bombay to England on the steamship Clyde. He was not yet 19 years. He was going to England to study law. On this voyage on the Clyde, he struggled to speak in English. As he would say, I had to frame every sentence. London, with its teaching institutions, public galleries, vegetarian restaurants, is a fit place for a student and a traveler, a trader and a fanist, as a vegetarian would be called by his opponents. Thus, it was not without regret that I left dear London. Now, on this ship, and this is the Oceana, then changed into a ship called the Astana, Gandhi was anxious. He didn't quite know what life would be like back home in India, whether he would succeed as a lawyer. And by this time, he had worked on a fallback option, a second string to his bow. He was going to try and also be a writer. If he didn't succeed in law, maybe he would succeed as a writer.
And he wrote 2 articles while on board this ship. These are the only 2 articles I think that he has ever written in his whole life, which are, no, not the only articles he wrote in his whole life. He wrote thousands of articles. The only 2 articles where he writes, above all, you might say merely to please the reader, because he's practicing his skill.
In my mind before I could bring it out. For the first time, he learned to eat, or tried to learn to eat, with knife and fork. His mother had extracted 3 promises from him as a condition for his going to England, that he would not eat meat, he would not drink wine, and he would not touch women. Not knowing what on the ship's menu was free of meat, and too shy to ask, he survived on some sweets and fruits he was carrying, until his cabin mate, another Indian, coaxed some Indians on the crew to cook some dal for Mohandas. After he reached London, he wrote a diary about this journey of his, this voyage of his. He tried to play the piano on board the ship. He admired the efficiency with which life was organized on the ship. He marveled at the construction of the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal was built in the year in which Gandhi was born, so only 18 years previous to this. So Gandhi marveled at this Suez Canal that was constructed. He felt that the engineers of the canal had competed with nature. His Excellency Mr. Arjun Singh, President of the City Parliament, Mr. Karl-Heinz Riemann, Professor Bipan Chandra, Professor Rothermund, leaders of the city of Frankfurt, and ladies and gentlemen. Let me express my gratitude for the words expressed today by you, sir, the President of the Parliament, and the very thoughtful overview of Gandhiji's life given by Mr. Shri Arjun Singh. I'm going to discuss Gandhi's journey in life through his voyages on the seas and oceans of this world. We can approach his life in many different ways. I'm going to discuss some of his voyages. I'm going to do this for the first time in my life. If you find it interesting, you will be lucky enough to be the first audience to hear this approach.